lynchings and firings and panic. Oh my, put your overrated turkey down. Get ready to be stuffed. With all the NFL news you need, it is time for Inside Coverage. I'm Jason Fitz. She's Jori Epstein. Charles, let's start here. We are two instead of three. We're usually the three amigos. Today we are a tag team. Shout out to our guy, C-Rob. Charles Robinson down with, he's got COVID for the third time. So most importantly, we hope that he's healthy and that it doesn't interfere with the amount of Thanksgiving food he wants to eat, Jori, because the show won't be the same without his snarky sass.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the third time's the charm equivalent for COVID. Hopefully it means he just doesn't have it anymore. But Fitz, you weren't here last year, but last year, C-Rob was texting Charles McDonald and I like all of these elaborate pictures of the cooking process as he and Don were making all these fancy dishes, the step by step. So I think that's the most disappointing part. Like, I'm sorry for him that he feels bad, but also like none of us get to hear the play-by-play of what C-Rob is cooking for Thanksgiving.
I will be honest with you, usually because I love to cook. Like, cooking is my favorite. Like, when people say, like, what do you do for fun? I love to cook. And there have been years in my life where even though I was working, I figured out a way, so because I've always worked on Thanksgiving, the funny thing for me is that anytime I've celebrated, I just pick a random day of the month. And it's like, okay, this is Thanksgiving. You can go out on YouTube and find old Macy's Day Parade from when I was like a kid. So I'll pop that up. I'll put on an old football game and I'll just make Thanksgiving Tuesday, November 3rd. Doesn't matter. I've always worked on Thanksgiving. So I usually love to cook and usually love to go out. But this is the first time since 2008 that I'm not working on Thanksgiving. So I'm going to do the smartest thing I can, Joy. Like, I'm going to go in the morning. I'm going to, be a good guy and volunteer in the community. Then I'm going to head to the casino and the sports book where I'm going to watch football and get really inebriated. So I'm just going to turn the phone off so that I don't drunk text. No drunk texting, no
that's
drunk
smart.
Tweeting will be I feel like
ahead.
it's going to be a win. I'm just going to leave the phone behind. I'm going to go get ripped. I don't know if that means is that a good Thanksgiving plan or a bad one? But yeah, that's what are you going to do for the world?
Yeah, I was telling you before we started recording, this will be my first Thanksgiving day with my family since 2015, because the last 7 years I was at the Cowboys game on Thanksgiving. So I will still be writing off of the night game for Yahoo Sports. So if y'all are listening to this on Friday, you can check out what I will presumably have written by that point about the Niners-Seahawks game. But I will be with the family back in Dallas, siblings, parents, cousins, all the fun. So always nice to get time with them.
That's amazing. And because you're a professional, you'll stay. So see, that's why I'm happy I'm not working at night, because that means all day I'm just if I'm not ripping shots by noon in a sports book, then things have gone. But I'm balancing it by, feeding some people in the morning. I feel like that's true Thanksgiving balance. Okay. Inside Coverage is all about news and notes. And, there's a lot to get into, obviously, over the course of what we're going to look for here. But I figured we could do it in a bit of a different way. We could try and figure out, is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? Right. So, are we freaking out? Are we not freaking out? That's the general concept of how we're going to run through some things and figure out, how big a deal is this in the grand scheme of things. We'll get to that in a minute, because we're going to go through Panic Meter, and I think that's fun. But let's start with something that, is the most predictable thing in the world. Zach Wilson has been benched for Tim Boyle. Tim Boyle. So, what are we supposed to make of this for Zach Wilson? What does it mean for Zach that he's done yet again with the Jets?
Yeah, I think that all we really need to know is Zach Wilson himself said in the Jets locker room this week that he is not surprised. And I think we've talked on this podcast for weeks about how, look, Zach Wilson seems like a just fine guy. I think he's come a long way off the field with the Jets in the last year, but he's not ready to be an NFL quarterback. And that is okay. But Robert Saleh and the Jets organization were continuing to put him and his team in this untenable situation, having him out there. There was 33 of the last 36 possessions. They hadn't scored a touchdown. They were having all of these games go by, just possession after possession. Robert Saleh kept saying everyone needs to play better around him. We can't assess Zach. And it's okay, but Zach also needs to play better, and Zach knows he needs to play better. And so I give Zach Wilson a lot of credit that he was telling Jets reporters this week he wasn't scapegoated. Absolutely not. We're not scoring touchdowns, and that's my job, is to help us score points. And so I think it'll be interesting. Now, you can say, if you see what happened after he got pulled from that Bills game last week, it didn't look any prettier, but I think they have to at least give a guy a little bit of time to settle in. And I don't mean weeks to settle in, but I think they need to see, Tim Boyle understands this offense. He was with Nathaniel Hackett in Green Bay. He's been in the building all year. Give him a chance to not light it up, but just allow the guys around him to do what they need to do, which quite frankly, they were not able to do it with Zach Wilson in the game. And I think also, we should be realistic about the fact that if it doesn't work with any quarterback, I don't know. I think what's actually one of the most fascinating things about this, Fitz, is I'm curious your opinion. Do you think Nathaniel Hackett is a lock to come back to the Jets in 2024? Because my question is, he's there because of Aaron Rodgers. And I think that that is a harsh thing to say. And it's something that it felt like people were maybe unfairly saying at some points. And definitely Aaron Rodgers does not agree with that statement. But when you see what he's done with every other, like the Denver situation, when you see what he's done this year, I'm not saying they need to be lighting it up, but to not even be able to score a touchdown for several weeks, I just think you can't right now point to Nathaniel Hackett's scheming, his ability to elevate players and feel confident. So are you for sure bringing him back in 2024 because he's Rodgers' guy and Rodgers is running the show there? Or what do you think should be the decision-making process
So
there?
I don't think he should come back. I think he will come back.
Yeah.
And this is all about Aaron Rodgers' control. But you're right. If you look at the numbers on Nathaniel Hackett, and also, let's be real about this. The shortcomings they knew they had coming into the season, offensive line, we knew that was going to be an issue. At skill position, they're still a respected football team. So you got to be able to find a way. When you've got Garrett Wilson, like, how many times did we hear early in the season, Aaron Rodgers was even chiming in on Devontae Adams, not getting the ball enough and saying, hey, you got Devontae, you find a way to get him the ball. I'm sorry, you got Garrett Wilson, you find a way to get him the ball. You find creative schemes. You find creative ways to put it in his hands. They've been able to do absolutely nothing. I understand their quarterback is a liability, but are we going to believe that Bagent wasn't a liability for the Bears? Yet DJ Moore was still able to at least put up some competent numbers, nowhere near what Justin Fields did, but I think the drop-off is too staggering. Now, this is all the Jets' fault. The Jets never should have put themselves in a situation where Zach Wilson could have been their backup. In my opinion, they needed to carry 3 quarterbacks and make sure that Zach Wilson stayed away from the field. Would have been better for the team and the organization. They didn't do that, and they never addressed it. And now Tim Boyle? Like, where are we as a league that a team that came in with true Super Bowl aspirations is playing Tim Boyle? And let's not get it twisted. Not because they had injury after injury after injury at the quarterback position. They had one injury at the quarterback position. And now you got Tim Boyle? Like, that's a lack of planning as an organization. That's a lack of any sort of a concept of the window you're in. So I'm looking straight at the Jets organization and saying, whatever's happening to you at the quarterback position is your own damn fault.
Right. And I think what's interesting is I'm so fascinated by this whole backup quarterback ecosystem right now, because I get that there are teams who you say, well, if your quarterback goes down, how much of a playoff contender really are you anyway? And how should you be making decisions based on that? But if you're the Cleveland Browns, it's like, well, you have the defense to contend. You don't necessarily need a guy. Or San Francisco. I do think Brock Purdy's a great quarterback, and I'm not trying to slam him, but I also think that they could probably contend without him just because they have so much talent, such great scheme on both sides of the ball. So the Jets really need to consider, like, if we're going all out, I think if we're being honest, the Jets believed that Aaron Rodgers was the reason and a required factor for them to be contenders. And so that's something they were operating on. I don't agree with that decision, but I do think they seem to be operating on that logic.
Yeah, this is no different than, and I know we've said this before, but for a new audience, I will say it again. Reminder that Gardner Minshew was signed in March for a reasonable contract. And a reminder, as we all know, that Josh Dobbs was traded for a couple weeks.
Yes.
Right. So right. But my point being, in March, a reasonable contract could have gotten you Gardner Minshew, right? And they chose not to do that. And this season, a mid-round pick swap got you Josh Dobbs. I mean,
I would say a late round pick. It was a 6th round pick. And that's the thing. Josh Dobbs is making everyone who doesn't have a backup quarterback look like they were not playing the game like they needed to. If you are a Howie Roseman, or if you are, in this case, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, you are understanding what is out there and setting yourself up for success and giving yourself depth. I mean, the Cowboys have done this for years with Cooper Rush. It's not that Cooper should be your starter, but he started one game 2 years ago. He won it at Minnesota on Sunday Night Football. He started 4 or 5 last year. And to have a guy like that when you believe you're in the window is pretty important.
Yeah, especially when you're going into the season with an old quarterback. Like, the hard part about this is that they brought in Aaron Rodgers. They gave Aaron Rodgers enough creative control, let's say, over everything that was happening. Jets fans yelled at me at the time because I said, I don't understand some of these moves. And now all of a sudden we sit here and, like, the one thing that couldn't happen happened. Aaron Rodgers got hurt at the beginning of the season. I get that. But there is a little bit of a, Tua Tagovailoa's dad's famous for so what, now what, right? Y'all where you are, what are you going to do about it? There has never been a now what for the Jets. Like, even since it happened, the fact that we are this late into the season, they're finally changing the quarterback, and they're changing to Tim Boyle is just, That's what I can't wrap my head around. Like you have a playoff chance if you could just competent. But I think Cleveland's a great metric here. Like I would argue the Jets have better weapons than the Browns have, and they have comparable defenses. So the Browns have gone out here and found a way to beat tough teams throughout the course of the year. The Jets have found a way to be incompetent every single week offensively. Somebody has to pay the price for that.
Well, it's also hard because, and I don't like to say this because I don't like to slam guys, but do you believe that even with the right backup quarterback, Nathaniel Hackett is getting the scheme ready? I want to believe yes, but I don't think Nathaniel Hackett has shown us reason to believe that. And I think you also then have to ask yourselves, okay, there's a report, I believe it was Adam Schefter who leaked it this past weekend saying the Jets are going to pursue Devontae Adams again in the offseason. And it's like, do we believe in nothing other than Aaron Rodgers' friends and coaches as the key here? And if so, like, how long are you doing this? I guess it helps ease the sting that Aaron Rodgers took that pay cut. So at least he's not also costing you like an unreasonable amount of money for his talents. But he's still coming back from this injury. He's still going to be 40 years old. And you're still relying so heavily. And I think that this is a better situation to rely on than what Josh McDaniels tried to do with the Raiders, making them Patriots 2.0. But I think ultimately, anytime you are trying like way too hard to replicate a previous system in another city, you are probably not thinking as creatively and as forward-thinkingly, if that is an adverb. I'd like to make it one. If not, forward-thinkingly. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Then that you can be. Like at some point, you can't let Aaron Rodgers come in and run the show. I don't think you can. And I guess what's your goal? If your goal is to get a season or two where you make it to a conference championship, maybe. But if your goal is to, one, win a Super Bowl, which is a different caliber, or two, have like long-term stability in your organization, then I think relying on Aaron Rodgers to run the place and make the decisions and be your front office and your coaching staff and your quarterback and your sideline quarterback, I think that's a bold move.
Well, it was a bold move also this week in Pittsburgh where we got the unthinkable for the first time since 1941. An in-season firing of a coach or offensive coordinator. Think about that. Coach or coordinator since 1941 for the first time the Steelers have made a move in season as they fire offensive coordinator Matt Canada. And the funny thing is back in 1941, the person that was fired was an co-owner of the team that fired himself. So you could make the argument that they've never actually made an in-season firing. So it speaks to how rare this is. But I don't know about you, Jori. I just looked at that and thought, okay, a little late to do that now. Like what glorious move do we think this is going to make for Kenny Pickett? Like I think Pickett's part of the problem. I think Matt Canada's part of the problem, but making a move this late in the season, I just don't know what the dividends are going to be, especially considering the fact that Pittsburgh is right in the thick of it. I understand it. I just don't know how much it helps.
Right. I think when I consider why it has been that long since they fired, it's because Tomlin knows how to like pull wins out of thin air and just create this culture in a defense that's always going to make you win more games than you actually are. And I give them credit for saying like, hey, our record isn't as bad as our offense is because we were able to do that, but that doesn't mean there aren't serious problems. I think you see the frustration that came after last week's game. Running back Najee Harris was definitely among the people in the locker room who were super frustrated, think something needed to change. And I guess you say, like, we need to understand what we have without Matt Canada here because he's not going to be around. I think you also get to a point where after the 2024 season, you're going to have to decide, do you want to pick up Kenny Pickett's fifth-year option and where do you see his future? And so starting to evaluate, what do you have here? What coaching staff and or additional pieces on the field should you be giving him next year to see if he's your guy, kind of like that the Bears need to do with Justin Fields, and then make that decision. It is interesting. I mean, do I think it's going to make a major difference? No. Do I think that it will allow them to assess more accurately where Kenny Pickett's at? Yes. I think you get to this point where Kenny Pickett is the problem and Matt Canada's the problem. There are probably other problems, and I'm not a Steelers expert in the way that you might be, and for sure my friend Brooke Pryor over at ESPN covering the Steelers is, but I think that you got to do something at some point. I am always so fascinated by, like, what was the reason that you pulled the trigger? What was the reason that Zach Wilson is Zach Wilson and Matt Canada have been problems for weeks for their teams, at least on the field. I'm not saying off the field. And then also with Matt Canada, the tenor was getting so loud. The Fire Matt Canada cheers that were happening at hockey games in Canada and like all of these places that were not Steelers background. And I don't think that's why Mike Tomlin did it. But I think that at some point, like, this is not what you want to be happening.
Part of what is interesting, because you're right, the timing is curious in many ways. I think the loud rumblings make a bigger difference. And, we talked about this when the Raiders made a change. Like Mark Davis being booed at a championship parade for the Aces played into that, right? I do think that when you are the owner, especially when you are a legendary ownership group and other sporting events are chanting about your coaching situation, especially for an offensive coordinator, it's like, is that guy worth it? And also, if you're the Steelers, you're looking at it and saying, look, we got a game against Arizona. Looks pretty winnable. We got a game against New England that looks on paper pretty winnable. Then a game against Indianapolis that on paper you think is pretty winnable. Like as they sit right now at 6-4, I can get them to 9-4 without any help in their last 3 games. So maybe this is the good chance to get to your point, the test before they get to Cincinnati, Seattle, and Baltimore. It's a chance to test something. I just don't. And this is just me. I don't believe the Steelers are a particularly good football team. I think this year they're just really well coached, right? And the offense has been a problem. But when you look at the weapons they have, if we were playing video game football, Steelers are pretty damn good. Like their running backs, their wide receivers, their tight end, like across the board, they're pretty damn good. I just don't think Kenny Pickett is. So I like your point, though. I'd never really thought of it, at least by bringing somebody else in. Now we get a little bit better answer because I think the Steelers have to realize internally that the change is coming. There's no way right now Pickett's put up the evidence to justify a 5th-year option in my mind. So you're going to let that play out. And now you are really up against the clock because you don't want to get stuck in a world where we've got random quarterbacks nobody's ever heard of starting games. You don't want to get stuck with one of those guys. So it becomes more important to get that answer.
Yeah, I remember when I was covering the Cowboys at Patriots game, and I guess would be 2019. And after the game, Jerry Jones is talking, and he's saying, like, you always consider when you're going out on the game, do you have the advantage on the sideline? Which Jason Garrett was about 2 months from losing his job at that point. And obviously, very few, if any, coaches have the advantage against Bill Belichick. But I think what is interesting here is you kind of go like, the Steelers have been outgained on offense every single game this season. They have been outgained on offense in 31 of 45 games that Matt Canada was their coordinator, according to Brooks' article on ESPN. And so I think you just get to this point where you're like, why am I consistently knowingly going into the game with this disadvantage on offense? Is there something I can do about it? I'm not saying you have to score 40 points every game. I'm not even saying you have to necessarily score 25 points every game, although sometimes you probably should. But to be outgained every single game, it's the same way if you're like losing the turnover battle every game. At some point, it's just hard to overcome that. And the Steelers have kind of, I wouldn't say like run their luck, because I don't think it's luck. I think that Tomlin is a very good coach and they do a lot of other things very well. But at some point, Tomlin knows that the same way he knows how to win, he knows that Matt Canada is not currently the recipe to win for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
So the only thing I'd add on the Steelers thing is whenever there's a breakup, I always look at these situations, like coach and team, and I look at it and say, what's the line going to be like for the next person trying to get that job? So when I look at the offensive coordinator position for the Pittsburgh Steelers, if I'm a coach right now, I'm thinking, okay, I can work under Mike Tomlin with the defense that's really going to get my back, with a couple of running backs that are absolutely worth it, with a couple of wide receivers and a tight end that I love. A little bit of work to do on the offensive line, but man, that's a pretty awesome job. When I flip the other side of it, and I'm a team, and I'm like, God, I really need an offensive coordinator, and Matt Canada's resume comes across the board, I just slide it on down into the trash on the other side. Like I think that speaks to where the weakness is in all of this, where the weakness lied in all of this. I'm surprised it took this long, but that's why I think the Steelers are far better off in this situation without Matt Canada. Never want to root for somebody to lose their job, but I just think that that's the truth there.
No, I think that's a great way to put it, and a great way to sort of like have this threshold of like, how do we objectively look at this? And then I would also say that there are more than just one candidate who would be great for it. But one guy who comes to mind immediately to me as someone who would be a great contestant for next year is Stroud Johnson, who's currently the quarterback's coach in Houston with CJ Stroud. I mean, what he's done with CJ Stroud is so impressive. He's helped Kirk Cousins previously, coming from Minnesota Vikings. I just think that he's got a lot of experience that would be really great as a compliment to Mike Tomlin. So it'll be interesting to see. I imagine he'll at least get interviews for some of these positions, but he's one name to keep an eye on.
All right. Well, Thanksgiving is all about playing games. It is time for us to play a game. It's called the Panic Meter. All right. So it's going to be panic. It's going to go full game show style. I will give you a subject and we will figure out the level of panic from 1 to 5. 1 being the least amount of panic. Like that's no big deal. Hey, everybody's good. We're going to kumbaya around the campfire. 5 is like, I left the turkey in too long. I fell asleep. The whole thing burned. The kitchen's on fire. So 1 to 5, 5, everything's an abject disaster. 1, everything's absolutely peaceful. And let's start with, you just mentioned Houston. All right. So CJ Stroud throws 3 interceptions. Oh, for the possible MVP candidate, 3 picks. What's the level of panic you have that maybe CJ Stroud is coming back to earth a little bit?
Yeah, I would say like 1.5 out of 5. So I think that if he continues to do this, I wouldn't panic, but then you can say like, why is this and what's changing? And our team's starting to figure him out, get film on him. But the reason is, first of all, if you have 3 interceptions as a rookie and you've had so few the rest of the season, so this really isn't reflective on like your resume as a whole. And also, you still won the game. So that's a great way to learn. And I think as he was sort of talking about, like some of these he has to anticipate certain things about where his receivers will be. Sometimes they're going to be there. Sometimes they won't. I am curious if there's something that Jonathan Gannon's defense did that he needs to be aware of. Okay, who else is playing a similar style of defense? Like I know, again, going back to my experience covering the Cowboys, Dak had a lot of trouble against like certain defenses and just the way they're playing. And it was less about how good the players were and more about which type of disguises they were using. So I think that's something to consider. But I still think that CJ Stroud is an excellent quarterback for the short, medium, and long-term future in Houston. He has had unbelievable success, and the only reason it's even a question is because he's been so good the rest of the season. So I am not panicking. How about you, Fitz?
Yeah, I'm not panicking at all. And I've just taken our scale of 1 to 5 and I've made it gobbles. So I'm giving it 1 gobble. It's not even like a gobble. It's just 1 gobble. But it's for the reason you just said. It's the bounce back that I thought was most impressive. And to go through 3 picks and still be just as calm. Like, I don't know. For me, there's a demeanor to it. There are some of those throws that were regrettable, but there was also a throw to Tank Dell in the back of the end zone. There was like, how many guys in the league can even make that throw, right? So
throw not under pressure, much less with the pocket collapsing off platform having escaped. Yes, it was impressive.
CJ Stroud is a superstar, and there is no doubt about it. 1 gobble for my amount of concern for this. I love that I've now made this gobbles. All right, so the Chiefs lose, and the Chiefs not only lose, but in the process of losing, a dropped touchdown is really the thing that sticks in our head. So the Chiefs and the weird ways that sometimes their flaws show up at the end of games, your level of concern on the gobble scale, 1 to 5, for how concerned you are for the fatal flaws of the Chiefs shining through and holding them back.
Okay, I love that you've made this a gobble scale. And also, we're not just going to say 2 gobble, 3 gobble. My level of concern with the Chiefs is gobble, 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 gobble. 4 out of 5 gobbles. We have to say how many gobbles now. And here's why. The Chiefs lost to the Eagles on Monday night. Okay, a lot of people, pretty much everyone, lose to the Eagles. That is not the issue. The issue is that they have not scored in the second half each of their last 3 games. They are averaging in the second half this year 5.3 points per second half compared to the Eagles' 13.9. Nobody in the entire league, the entire NFL, has fewer points in the second half this season than the Kansas City Chiefs. The second closest is the Arizona Cardinals, who are 2-9 with 0.7 points more in the second half. And I think there are different ways to win. And I wrote about this after the game, which is that the Eagles and Chiefs have a similar margin of victory. It's something like 6-7 points, one 6.8, one 7.3 roughly. So they're winning by about the same amount, but the Eagles are slowly but steadily clawing and making the plays that they need to make to win the game at the end. The Chiefs are having some success early. Their defense is holding off other teams, and then they're just not able to close out. And so it may not be fully reflected in their record right now. And I get that they don't have many losses, and one of them was also without Travis Kelce or Chris Jones in week 1 against the Lions. So the concern is less about their record and more about playoff games typically come down to the fourth quarter. They typically come down to the end of the fourth quarter, and they're typically close games. You need a team, if you want to get all the way to the Super Bowl, which is what the Kansas City Chiefs any year Patrick Mahomes is on the field should be wanting to do. You need a team that can play at the end. And I will also say, I don't think this is a Patrick Mahomes issue. Not that really anything is a Patrick Mahomes issue, but this guy is still playing at an extremely high level. He was still dropping that ball exactly where Marquez Valdes-Scantling needed it at the end of the game. But as I wrote in my column, an NFL pass requires 2 parties, someone to throw it and someone to catch it. And Patrick Mahomes cannot catch his own passes the majority of the time. There's always those like weird throw it off, it gets tipped, and then you run. And I love when those happen. But he needs someone to do that. And they just don't have those guys right now because the defenses can take out Travis Kelce and he's left without reliable targets.
I agree with so much of what you just said. But on the gobble scale of 1 to 5, I'm just a... I'm just a...
Wow.
Just one.
Wow.
One
3 gobbles different.
All right.
It had a different intonation than my gobble. Yeah. I don't know how that impacts things.
Well, by the way, I think C-Rob now has never been happier that he missed a show because the chances that we would ever get C-Rob to go, gobble. All right. So
I really hope he's listening to it. We need someone to just like boom it into his house as he's like taking a nap while sick.
Critique the gobble. He's going to wake up a week later and be like, y'all
Stone,
didn't
you
really
need to clip this for us so that we can send this to him.
C-Rob's going to be like, that was the fever, right? You guys weren't actually gobbling. It was just, okay. So here's the reason I give it one gobble, and I'm just going to keep going up to that range over and over again. It's for the thing that you mentioned about the losses, because I'm with you. Nothing looks right. Nothing looks good. I will give their defense so much credit. I think the Chiefs' defense is chef's kiss this year. But the problem is, if you're rooting against the Chiefs, which I usually am in life, the problem is they lost that first game without two of their most important players. They lose their second game on the flu game, and the third game against the best team in the NFL, they were one stupid drop pass away from winning. So none of it looks good, but they still have the inside track to home field advantage in the AFC, and they still have found a way to win all of these ugly games. Now, I'm going to factor in one other reason why I'm not concerned for the Chiefs, and that is that there are fatal flaws to every other contender in the AFC. Like, I think the loss of Mark Andrews is huge for the Ravens. There's no quarterback in Baltimore. There's no quarterback in Cleveland. The Bills look like they've sort of lost all of their sing. Miami's not good when they play good teams. Like, the Chargers are a disaster. Are we really going to bank on the Texans at this point? Like, there are so many fatal flaws to the AFC. There's one flaw fixer in the entire conference that I look at and say, that's the guy, and it's Mahomes. So, like, even though they're wildly flawed this year, and I look at it and say, nah, they're not good, all they do is find ways to win, and when they lose, it's usually because of some weird circumstance. So I'm only lightly concerned for the Chiefs, even though I agree with everything you said in your analysis of why it doesn't work. I just think that whatever I did personally that pissed off the football gods 20 years ago, they are now taking out on me with Patrick Mahomes every single week. Okay, so
I like that, but here's my one counter argument to it.
Okay.
If you're the Cleveland Browns and you've made the playoffs once since 2002, yeah, your goal is like you win a playoff game, you are rolling. Also, if you're winning on without Deshaun Watson, a lot of fun of that for several reasons. But if you're the Kansas City Chiefs and you lose in the conference championship or maybe even in the Super Bowl, is that a successful season? And I know that's crazy, and I'm not saying that like they shouldn't celebrate successes along the way, but they have a quarterback who can get them. So you're right. They should still make it far, and I don't think by any means like they're not missing the playoffs. They're probably, I would be very surprised if they don't win a playoff game. But I do think that every postseason game, you will feel less sure that they can pull it out because they don't have that ability.
I agree. I'm less confident, but I still... Man, I don't know. Like, I can see that Eagles-Chiefs game be in the Super Bowl, and it plays out the exact same way. But this time, because the football gods, MVS catches that football. All right. So speaking of the Eagles, they need, a little bit of late magic there, a little help. They aren't blowing teams out. We keep saying it doesn't look right. Is Jalen Hurts healthy? Like, what's your level of panic for the Eagles at this point? How many gobbles?
Maybe like a gob. Like, I would say 0.5 out of 5. I am not concerned about the Eagles. I think that they now are 9-1. They've got the best record in the league. When they were 8-1, they were now 8-1 2 years in a row, which the last 3 teams that were 8-1 2 years in a row won the Super Bowl the second year. And this is the team that wins ugly, but they win. And I think that that's what you want. Again, obviously it's great if you can blow out teams occasionally, but I think that you kind of get this facade of how good you actually are. And I think the Eagles know where they need to improve. They have also Jalen Hurts will hopefully be a little healthier by the playoffs. And I guess that's probably unlikely given he's going to continue to play, but they will hope that. And I think that this is a team that just knows how to get it done. And also you can see how quickly they can change a game. Our colleague Frank Schwab and I were talking about this Monday night, which is that this is a team that was really struggling. Jalen Hurts was sacked 5 times in the first half by the Chiefs, all this stuff. And then he makes one great play to Devonta Smith. And now they're close enough that they can just use the brotherly shove, which is one of their many cheat codes. And so I think they have all these different ways that they don't need to be great all the time to win games. How about you?
I sit down at the table across from the turkey, and the turkey's got sunglasses on. In my mind, I don't know why. The turkey's giving me a weird side eye, and I start to do my gobbles. I just take that big deep breath, and the turkey just looks at me and goes, mm-mm. I have none. I can't even put a gobble down on this. I tried, and the turkey told me not here. He said, not you, fat Jesus, and I had to walk away from the gobbles altogether. I have no concern over this for every single reason you just said. Plus, if right now, to flip it, my level of concern for the Lions and the 49ers just went all 5. Gobble, 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 gobble. All 5. Because now I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, I got to go to Philly. I got to go to Philly. Like, I just don't think, I think Philly can win anywhere. I don't think that's a big deal. I don't know that I would trust the Lions to go into Philadelphia. And anytime a West Coast team has to go all the way east and play what could be cold weather could be night. We always know those kickoffs. That's a huge variable. If I'm San Francisco, I don't want to have to go to Philly. If I'm Detroit, I can't go to Philly. So my concern for Philly is so little because they can stop the run. They obviously have one of the best wide receivers in the league and one of the best wide receiver rooms in the league. They've got a quarterback that is just absolutely in control 99% of the time, and they live in 4-down territory. And that's such a difference. Like, when you are looking at 3rd and 1.5 is going to be a conversion for them 90% of the time. Like, if you live in 4-down territory, you're playing different. Like, it's impossible to stop brotherly shove. And as a result, which I'm giving them credit for, like, I think that's amazing. I think it's crazy nobody else has been able to replicate a way to get brotherly shove into their offense. But it is such a huge part of why I think they're going to be tough to beat, because any 4th and 1 is you're susceptible every single time. So they win in the trenches on both sides. I love the Eagles at this point. I think San Francisco's a great team too, but there are no gobbles for the concerns for the Eagles. Now, what about this though? Like, how concerned if I'm an AFC guy? Because all year it was the AFC is going to be the best. Like Miami, Buffalo, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Kansas City, the Chargers, the Jags, supposed to be a gauntlet. Impossible to get through the AFC. And instead, the AFC is just mired in mediocrity. And on the other side, in the NFC, I have the Lions, the Eagles, and the 49ers. So if I'm an AFC fan, and I thought for sure I was going to have an easy track with the Super Bowl going to come to my conference, how concerned should AFC fans be?
Yeah, I think that we have a pretty good chance that the AFC is not going to be able to defend their Lombardi this year. I would say gobble, 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 3 out of 5. Like, there is some, I mean, you still have Patrick Mahomes, and I know I gave you all these Chiefs issues, but I don't think they're unfixable. I just think they haven't fixed them yet. But I definitely have more confidence in either the Eagles or Niners winning a Super Bowl than I do the Chiefs. How about you?
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I'm back to 5. Gobble, 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 gobble. Wow. Yeah, I think there was 5. Yeah. 5,
you're a little bit binary, Fitz. Like, I mean, all or none.
That is.
I'm like 1.5, 3, like 2.7, and you're like 0, 5, 10.
Look, I'm either eating rice and grilled chicken or I'm eating an entire cake. There is no in between.
Capacity for nuance on inside coverage.
The concept of moderation. The number of times my friends have been like, "Why don't you try moderation?" Like when I got a stress fracture in my leg from working out like a maniac, the doctor's like, "You could try moderation." I'm like, "You think I got to where I am?" No, I have no idea what moderation means. So now my level of concern is 5 gobbles because A, it's fun to gobble, but B, and this is important, I don't trust anybody in the playoffs in the AFC. So I think you have a real chance for chaos that's going to end up leading you to a team you didn't think. Like right now, I have a hard time like ruling out Houston. I don't know. I mean, why not Houston? Any given Sunday, Texans end up in the Super Bowl. I don't know. Like when I look on the NFC side, like, man, I don't want to take on the Eagles. I don't want to take on the 49ers. I don't know who the Lions will be in that situation, but damn, they're talented and they're good. Like, I at least feel like the NFC has a much better chance of giving me their best on the Super Bowl Sunday, whereas I could see any random wild card getting all the way to I could see no Joe Burrow and the Bengals still sitting there in Vegas trying to win the Super Bowl.
Okay, so if you give me that the Texans can make it, I have another team I want to know. Like, do you think there's a chance? So I know you're wrecking your liver tomorrow, so I'm just going to puncture your soul here. Do you think there's any chance that Denver could make a run in the playoffs?
No. So here's the thing. I want to say no because of how bad it looked, but right now, the way it looks, I mean, Russ. The biggest thing and I'll die in the way I did the math, like I'll die in the hill of my process and figuring out why I thought Russ was cooked. I just think it takes a lot of ego to take a step back. And once you've been like, no, I'm going to cook, it's hard to step back and say, no, I'm going to game manage. Yeah. And I think game manage is a little bit of an overstatement, but man, Russ feels very much like Seattle Russ right now. Like they went back to doing what he did well there and he bought into that, which I didn't think he would. So I think that's a huge surprise. And they've traded away so many assets. They're still playing as well as they're playing. They're they're running the ball well. They got good weapons. I have a hard time believing. I think the Broncos are going to come down to earth. I really do. But right now, like, I'm also willing to admit that that's because I've seen the worst and I can't shake the worst of what was in my head. Like, I think the entire season is being viewed differently for the Broncos because of their loss to the Dolphins. And I think the Dolphins are being viewed wildly different because they put up 70 on the Broncos. If they'd won that game 20-0, right, our conversation on the Dolphins would be really different.
I wish we could get a rematch between those two teams. Denver and Miami, because I'm not convinced Miami would win. I think they can, but I'm not sure. I
mean, my concern, like, I'm just going totally off schedule here, but like, I'll give you 4 gobbles, gobble, for the Dolphins. Like,
you just gave me 3.
Gobble, 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 gobble. Gobble, 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 gobble. That's because I didn't use the high voice. I'll give you 4 gobbles for the Dolphins. I mean, I went into that game expecting the Dolphins to beat the Raiders by 30. I thought that was a pretty fair estimation. And instead, the Raiders did what I think some teams have done. They made a choice. Hey, we're going to shut down Mostert. We're going to keep everything in front of us there. And if Tyreek gets his, Tyreek gets his. Tyreek was fine. But the fact that they only put up 20 points against an okay Raiders team, I don't know. Like, I watched that Dolphins game really thinking that they would make a statement. They did not. I am concerned about why the Dolphins just disappear for 20, 25 minutes a game.
Yeah. And I think with Devon Achane hurt and some of the other injuries that they've got, like, they're also winning in a different way than they did at the beginning of the season. Like, they were just like light you up. And then now it's more like, oh, Jalen Ramsey's going to keep you from doing anything. So it'll be interesting. I think that they still have potential, but I don't think the offense is as unstoppable as it was back when they played Denver.
Well, and that's where some of the analytics nerds I've talked to the last 3 weeks, and I say that lovingly to all of them that listen, some of the analytics nerds have made the point, hey, I use the Olympic example all the time, take the best and the worst out. If you take the worst of the Dolphins season and the best of the Dolphins season out and ask where they normalize in the middle, they normalize as a pretty good offense, and they get credit for being something bigger than that because the legend of Tyreek and the numbers he's putting up, and but realistically, right now we keep talking about the Dolphins' defense is playing better, and they are. I don't think the Raiders' offense was a particular challenge though. Like, I'm stunned that a 5-5 Raiders team at the time that I didn't think was going to be a challenge on either side of the ball presented a challenge to a Dolphins team that should be Super Bowl caliber. Like, the Raiders are a hell of a lot closer to a top 10 pick than they are to the Super Bowl, and the Dolphins didn't look dominant in that all. Like, I'm concerned. I am concerned at this point about the Dolphins.
Yeah. Wow. No, I think there's reason to be. Now, again, I also think that having Tyreek Hill, kind of like having Patrick Mahomes, gives you like a pretty quick way to solve any concerns. But
if only they were on the same team. Oh, wait. Okay. The Commanders, by the way.
What do you think that would look like?
No, I can't even. Hell, twice a year for me. Okay. So the Commanders are playing the Cowboys Thursday. This game, man, this game's interesting, Jori, because I think optics matter to ownership. And I think new ownership is looking around, and they're just like, new ownership for Washington means change. Anytime somebody buys, Matt Ishbia buys the Phoenix Suns, what's the first thing he does? He goes out, makes blockbuster trades. Like, a new ownership, like blockbuster moves. If you're Ron Rivera, I don't know, what should the panic level be for Ron Rivera about, I don't know, having a job on Monday? Like, again, I'm not rooting for guys to get fired, but this could get really ugly really fast, and it's a nationally televised game.
Gobble, 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 which, by the way, I'm using the scale, and I'm aware, as I'm counting out, that there are 5 gobbles there out of 5. Here's the deal. There was some speculation that, I'm great at counting to 5. Don't mind me. I'll be here all day. There was speculation that Ron Rivera could have been gone after last game when they lost to our good old friend, Tommy DeVito. He wasn't, but this was a short week. It would have been a little bit difficult for the team to have like 4 or 5 days to get acclimated. Now, you're playing the Cowboys. It's a nationally televised game, which factors into the embarrassment level for ownership. And we talked about that with the Raiders. That was something that definitely fired into the timing with Josh McDaniels. And they have 10 days after that until their next game. And so you have a little bit of time to reset. You also have an offensive coordinator in Eric Bieniemy, who you might want to see what he's capable of doing. Magic Johnson, who is not the top owner, Josh Harris is the top owner of the new regime, but he is one of the owners, tweeted after this past game, "Wow, my Washington Commanders turned the ball over 6 times today and gave the Giants 24 points off turnovers. We lost 31-19. First of all, I don't really know why he tweeted that. I was listening to someone on another pod say something about him. It's not a particularly revealing tweet. He's just kind of giving you a quick game recap a few hours later. But the points off turnovers does not reflect well on your team. And it is also something that clearly stood out to ownership. And oh, by the way, if that was what you wanted, 31-19, now you're playing a Cowboys team that has been known to get a lot more points off turnovers than that. Also has a cornerback in Deron Bland, who has 4 pick sixes already this season, and there's still 7 games left. I mean, you have a lot that you should be worried about. I would not be surprised if they try and hide it during the Black Friday game. Oh, you have the Jets playing the Dolphins. Well, why don't we just get a new coach, or get a coach out of there during that slot, see if we can get everyone to not pay a whole lot of attention. And as you mentioned, with new ownership, this is not their guy. This is not their coach. Ron Rivera seems like an excellent human being, and I also think he did a really good job holding Washington over during the tumultuous time that Dan Snyder threw them into. But I don't think that he is the coach of this team's future, and I do think that you want to see what Eric Bieniemy could do the rest of the year.
I think Ron Rivera's interesting. It's rare that coaches ever get a third shot at it. I think Ron could. He's so beloved in so many league secret circles. But also, I think this moment is just sort of done. And the Bieniemy point, and, Frank had made that point on Sunday night with me also, that I've been thinking a lot about it. What does it mean? Because Bieniemy being right there gives you a chance to see what he looks like as a head coach. I really like that. I also think, though, Sam Howell is throwing the ball so much. The offense has so little balance. It's such an aggressive portion of it. Part of that lays at the feet of Bieniemy. So I would genuinely be interested to see who Eric Bieniemy is, the leader. The ownership portion of this is such a big deal to me. And it truly is. Right now, this is the most significant hire that the Washington football team will make for the next 20 years. Because this is your new owner saying to the community, this is the direction of our franchise moving forward. And I think there has to be some element of investment in the fans to the new ownership to the fans. You got to show people you're listening. You got to show people you care. You got to show people you're willing to spend money, and you got to show people no stone unturned. So all of that leads me to believe that this is the beginning of the end for Ron Rivera. And also, you really smartly pointed out, and I got to reiterate, doing it this weekend would allow them days of actual football to distract the world from it. So you're not even that big of a story. So I'm with you. If my gobble meter, I'll give it 4. Gobble, 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 gobble. 4 gobbles of concern for Ron Rivera's job making it through this weekend. And largely, by the way, shout out to my buddy Derek Wells. Not that you guys care, but you should watch halftime of that game because Dolly Parton is playing the halftime show of that game. And one of my closest friends, like a brother to me, Derek Wells, he's going to be sitting in on guitar. He's a huge musician in Nashville. His dad has played with her for years. So Derek's playing. D. Wells is out there. So if you don't watch a game, watch halftime. And when you see a guitar player with a stupid, expensive watch on his wrist, that's Derek subtly flexing to the world. So
and the last three numbers I'll give you from the Commanders that I think will factor into this decision is right now, no team has given up more points than the Washington Commanders. They rank last in points allowed. They are 29th in yards allowed. And while their offense is pretty decent, 17th and 12th, they rank 30th in turnovers. You're not going to win a lot of games if your defense can't stop anyone and you're turning over the ball. And I think the defense has to fall under Ron Rivera because he's both the head coach and a defensive guy. And the turnovers, that's like a head coach type thing too, because that is not just about your guys. And so I think the part of the team that is most succeeding is the part that Ron Rivera is probably least responsible for. And that is not a good sign when you're making your case to ownership about why they should keep you around.
Yeah, and by the way, that defense might look a little better if they still had, I don't know, Chase Young and Montez Sweat. So right. The ownership group has already told you, hey, we're going to restart anyway. So, good. At some point, Ron Rivera, I'm not sure Ron Rivera doesn't get that call and says, oh, thank God. It's like, hey, guys, you guys go from here, take it. Like, my guy deserves a year off after everything he's done with that Washington football team, for sure.
But one thing I'll be looking for also is how do the Commanders let him go if they let him go? And again, I'm not saying he's for sure out after this weekend. And if he beats the Cowboys, he's pretty for sure not out yet. But I do think I want to know, I just hope the Commanders release him in a way that is as respectful as possible, given what he's done for that organization, because they're really lucky he was willing to coach them, much less that he did what he did during that time.
Now, this is one of those opportunities where I wish there was a way for him to just
resign.
ascend, ascend into hey, he's going to take over this role in the front office, and we're going to let him be part of the team operations, and he's done too well for us, and he survived Dan Snyder. That in and of itself should be. So while we're talking about coaching hot seats, there's no seat hotter than Brandon Staley. Before we get into sort of some of our thoughts on it, for anyone that hasn't heard, Brandon Staley was asked a very normal question after the game about whether or not somebody would take over defensive play calling duties. A fair question given the fact that their defense has been hot garbage, and it is not uncommon for a head coach that has also play calling duty on the offensive side. We see it all the time, where when things start to go awry, maybe they give up play calling duty for a few weeks, right, or for the rest of the season. So Staley was asked that question. This is what his response was to the media after the loss to Green Bay. Check it out.
I'm not here to talk to the fan base. I'm here to talk to my players, the locker room. I know that we give ourselves a chance to win every single week with the game plans that we have, okay? And we have done it here. You guys act like we've never played good defense. That's not the truth. That's not the truth. You act like we haven't made any improvements. Today, in the run game, we played outstanding. We're rushing the quarterback well. What we got to do a better job of is in the passing game. And that's where our full attention is, and it's where it will continue to be. There were a lot of other things that caused us to lose today. It certainly wasn't our defense. It was the way we played as a team. We didn't play well enough on the red zone on offense. We dropped too many passes. Okay, we gave up a few killer sacks. Okay, we did this as a team. Stop making it about one unit, because that's not what happened out there today. Our team lost.
You hear the passion in his voice, and again, he was asked if he's giving a play calling.
Passion is an interesting word.
Clear. Yeah.
Defensiveness is another one I would use.
Yeah. I mean, he just got torched by Jordan Love. Jordan Love made them look dumb, right? So he's in his feels about it. What is your level of concern for him?
Gobble, 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 gobble. I would be pretty shocked if he's the head coach in 2024. And I'll be surprised if he makes it through the season. And I think that if he continues to have press conferences like the one he just had after the loss, he will not make it through the season, because this is a guy that knows he's on the hot seat. He's pretty clearly concerned about it. And I just think, and again, obviously we're reporters, so we're part of the media, but when he says stuff like, you guys are telling the wrong story and stop asking me this question, and what you're saying is the problem isn't the problem. Maybe we should have a little more our defense needs to get better. Here's what we're doing. Here's my plan for it. Do you want your head coach, your voice of the locker room, your guy sending the messages to get that defensive? I've been in situations where I've watched head coaches blame the refs for losses. And I'm not saying occasionally one bad call, but be well, we did it right. Or after the Cowboys lost to the Niners in the playoffs 2 years ago with the botched end of the game where they didn't even get their last playoff. Don't blame the refs there. Even if there is something take accountability. And I just think that when you have a head coach who is who's getting defensive rather than taking accountability, that is not the message you want to be sending your locker room.
I have to reiterate this with the Chargers. They have a win early on against Minnesota when Minnesota was floundering and not playing as well. They have a win over Vegas, who's not good. They have a win over Chicago, who's not good. They have a win over the Jets, who's not good. They have not beaten an actual team worth a damn this year. And the funny thing is, opportunity is still ahead of them. They have Baltimore this weekend, right? We know that. After that, New England 2-8, Denver 5-5, Vegas 5-6, Buffalo 6-5, but not nearly who they have been. And then Denver again. They have 5 straight games that if they really wanted to be a playoff team are winnable, they could get into that San Francisco game with the playoffs still there in front of them. They just haven't proven this year to be worth anything as a team. They are not good. And Brandon Staley is a big part of why, because their defense is a disaster. Now, it's not Brandon Staley's fault that Quentin Johnston drops a wide open ball, right? These things are not his fault. But my God, Jori, at some point, you got to hold somebody accountable. And, if we're going to look at in-season moves, I think the reason it warrants an in-season move is that you got football ahead of you that you should be winnable. You got to find a way to win.
And my issue is that, yes, to be fair, he said toward the end of his quote, our team lost and I'm fully responsible for it and I take full responsibility. And then he goes, but we lost as a team today and that's the storyline. And he had said all this, you guys act like we've never played good defense. At some point, I don't believe you when you say I take full responsibility, but also you guys are telling the wrong story about what we lost. The same way I didn't believe Robert Saleh when he was not trying to give Zach Wilson accountability or blame for anything. Like at some point, if you are so concerned about trying to say, and that's the storyline, if you're so concerned about controlling the narrative, that you are explicitly saying, here is the narrative I want you guys to tell, and I'm going to be mad if you ask a question to the contrary, we got some issues.
Yeah, and that's where, when everybody starts trying to save themselves and the narratives change, that's when everything's a problem. And now Bosa, Joey Bosa likely headed to IR with a foot injury that looked pretty bad, and one of the best players for them defensively. I think it's fair to be harsh on Brandon Staley, to also be harsh on some of the players, and just to be real about the fact that the Chargers every year battle more injuries. It just feels like their stars are never healthy. They fired their trainer. They got new conditioning people in, still having the same issues. So
they're cursed by people's lungs anymore.
Well, I mean, now that is fair, but you look at they're just cursed by the injury bug. And I think these can all be true at once, but it can also be true that Brandon Staley just hasn't done a good enough job. And at some point, if you're an ownership group and you look at it and say, man, every year we underperform, you got to make a change.
Yeah, I think it's true. And it's also interesting, if the offense isn't doing what you want, how much is Kellen Moore the top candidate for that job? Is he not? It'll be interesting to see what direction they go, and also whether Tom Telesco, their general manager, stays in place, because there have been a series of misses on the personnel side for sure.
I never think blowing it all up is a great answer, because you're just going to continually hope that you get the right people in the room. But I also think you got to look in the mirror and be honest with yourself where you are as a franchise. And then you got to be honest about why. There's nothing wrong with, hey, this was a bad year. Sometimes that happens. Or we were, starters lost a ton of games to injuries. Sometimes that happens. But when you are year after year after year underperforming, then you got to look at it and say, okay, it's one or two things. Is it the talent or is it the coaching? And with the Chargers, there's some really talented players, but there's also some big misses. There's some coaches that have a great reputation, but the team doesn't seem to ever be overperforming when they need to. So I just think that this is one of those, you just got to blow the whole thing up and start all over again, because you're going to be taking on Mahomes and Andy Reid for the next however many years. You don't have a chance unless you're doing everything the right way.
Absolutely. And I think that this organization has maybe not moved as quickly on some of those big picture changes and organizational changes as they could have. And so again, we don't root for people to lose their jobs. But I think when you look at the case of what they have done relative to the talent they have, relative to the talent they could have acquired, there's reason to have questions.
Yeah. And there's nuance to that combo in general. Sometimes, I don't want my owner to be impulsive and just fire everybody all the time. I agree. But also sometimes you got to make sure the organization is admitting mistakes as quickly as possible. The longer you spend in a bad situation, the worse it makes your future too. So there's a fine line for all of that. I think the Chargers have given this plenty of due process at this point. Now you got to look around and say, okay, we're wasting another year of Justin Herbert. We're wasting another year of talented players on the defense. Yeah, it's waste all over the place.
And in Tom Telesco's defense, hitting on Justin Herbert was so massive to be able to so soon after Phillip Rivers' era get in a quarterback like that, who is your guy and who is the right guy. So you got to give them some credit, like you said, for some of the hits, but you also want to make sure now that when you have the quarterback, which is the number one predictor of whether or not you can go as far as you need to in the NFL, that you're using that time.
All right, guys, we will be back tomorrow. A special Thanksgiving edition of Zero Blitz. I brought in Mike Golick Jr. I'm just telling you, there's this relationship between food and NFL that you do not want to miss. It's quick hit, quick listen. Make sure you get out there. We got your Thanksgiving needs fulfilled. You can follow us on social media. Follow Charles Robinson. Tell him to get well at Charles Robinson. Easy way to do it.
Tweet at C-Rob and tag us, telling him to feel better soon.
That is the important thing.
Give him all your favorite movie recs, and then he can watch them and let me know what happens.
Make them all bad, bad rom-coms. Let's see if we can send him down a binge-worthy bad rom-com where he's how did this happen? Hour after hour. You guys
also
can follow
just tweet
us.
Lots of gobbles at him and ask him to gobble back at you guys. Let's just look. He's got time on his hands right now. He's not feeling up to it. You guys just assault his mentions in the most wonderful and encouraging way possible.
If we can get his mentions flooded with requests for gobbles and he has no idea why, when he finds out, oh God, this is going to be a delight. This is delightful. Tweet us to @Jory Epstein, @Jason Fitz, Stone doing God's work, especially today, @SJ Rochelle. That's our producer behind the glass. podcast. And of course, don't forget, you can get out to breakingtea.com/Terez. That's how you can continue to support Terez Paylor's legacy with the all juice tee or hoodie. Hoodie is wildly soft and comfortable. I wear it all the time. And the money raised from that helps the Terez Paylor scholarships at Howard and Mizzou. So you don't want to miss that. It's a great way to continue to support the legacy of somebody that meant so much to all of us here. Leave us a 5-star review, rate, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, or enemies. Tell everybody to hang out with us. We will be back next Wednesday as a full trio with more inside coverage. Eat too much turkey and get all those gobbles out of your system. Thanks for hanging out with us. Gobble.